A lioness, once fierce now blind and withered, drags her failing body across the scorched earth of a world that forgot her, but deep beneath the silence and the sun and the years. Something ancient refuses to die, a memory not seen, but felt, a voice she has not heard in a lifetime, yet echoes in the bones of her being. And as the last of her strength fades and the desert stretches out like an ending, the ground begins to tremble, not with death, but with life towering and unexpected. And when the shadows fall over her broken frame, it is not the end she finds, but a beginning. She should not believe in the return of something long lost, yet never gone, an impossible recognition between souls once torn apart, now pulled back together by a bond that neither time nor blindness nor distance could erase. Each morning Daniel rose before the sun, not because he needed to, but because he always had the same way he had, when Maisha was small and hungry and waiting. His hands moved through familiar motions, boiling water for tea, checking the worn leather satchel he no longer used. The radio still crackled on the same frequency, though no one called anymore, and in the corner of the room an old collar lay curled like something sleeping untouched, yet never moved. He walked the reserve trails alone now, nodding to the distant giraffes, to the wind-swept acacia trees, to the silence where her footsteps used to follow him. At night, he sat by the porch with a journal he rarely wrote in his pen, hovering, then falling still, each page filled not with words, but with breathless space, the kind left behind when something loved goes missing, not suddenly, but slowly, like light fading from a room. And though the world around him remained steady, quiet, functional, there was a gravity in him, a soft drag to his movements, as if some part of him remained tethered to a presence he couldn't explain, and wouldn't name, something that watched through memory, through habit, through hope, that had long since stopped pretending to be rational, yet still waited still, listened as if at any moment the grass might shift, and the shape he lost would return to its rightful place beside him. It happened under a white sky, with no clouds, just wind and paperwork, and a silence that felt rehearsed. The truck doors opened, and Maisha hesitated, not out of fear, but confusion, her eyes already dimming, sensing something wrong, something missing. Daniel stood still, fists clenched, trying to stay calm like they told him, but every instinct screamed to run, to stop it, to speak to her one last time. But what words could he say that wouldn't break her? She turned once as they coaxed her forward, her body, unsure, her ears flicking toward his breath, and then she was gone. The gate closed, and the sound it made was final. It rang in his chest like a bell that never stopped echoing afterward. The world did not collapse. It simply continued without her, which somehow hurt more. He returned to his routines, but they felt hollow. The feeding pails untouched, the morning walks without direction. He stopped speaking aloud, forgot how to laugh, stopped dreaming, or rather stopped remembering them. Maisha in the wild moved through days in slow hunger, her vision clouding until the sky became only heat and motion. She hunted shadows, missed every kill, learned to wait by empty waterholes, her ears tracking ghosts. She did not understand. Solitude thickened around her, like dust. She forgot how to run for joy, forgot what safety felt like. The world she had been given was stripped away without explanation, and the one voice that had ever meant comfort was lost to the wind. Years passed, not loudly, but with the dull ache of waiting. Something in both of them froze, a silence not just around them, but inside. And though they were miles apart, they mirrored each other. Daniel keeping the lights dim at night, Maisha resting with her face to the wind, as if hoping that somehow the air might still carry him back. Let me pause for just a moment. And now I want to ask you, where are you listening from? Have you ever had someone, a person or even an animal, remember you after many years apart? A glance, a touch, a sound that brought everything back? If stories like this speak to something in you, hit subscribe. There's so much more to come, and I'd love to share it with you. It started with a photo, blurry, distant, taken from a drone, A lioness collapsed in the sand, framed by the towering forms of elephants shielding her from the sun, and in the corner of that image, something in her posture, the tilt of her head, the way her body curled not in defeat but in waiting, sent a jolt through Daniel's chest. He stared at it, breath gone, heart thudding. The ranger's voice still echoed in his ear. "There's a lioness. She's blind, the elephants. They're not leaving her." And Daniel whispered, a name he hadn't said aloud in years, and it tasted like grief and fire. Maisha could it be? But the doubt came too. What if it wasn't her? What if she wouldn't know him? What if the years had truly broken what once was whole, and yet his hands moved on, their own packing supplies, checking fuel maps he hadn't touched in years, all while his mind reeled with memories, the warmth of her fur, the weight of her head in his lap, her blind trust. Even before her eyes had faded, she used to walk beside him, without needing to see him, as if she knew where he would be before he arrived. And now that same unseen thread tugged at him again. Every reason to stay dissolved beneath one truth. He had to know, not for closure, not even for healing, but because some bonds refuse to die even when buried in time and silence. Because sometimes memory is not a ghost, but a compass pointing back to the place where part of you still waits. So he drove through the night desert, wind battering the windows, stars wheeling. Above and in the quiet of the engine's hum, he dared to hope that if she was still out there, if any part of her remembered, then maybe, just maybe, they could find their way back through the silence to each other. Dust swirled low across the plain as the truck rolled to a stop, its engine clicking into silence. And for a moment, Daniel could only sit gripping the wheel, breath caught somewhere between hope and heartbreak. The ranger pointed quietly toward the shade of the elephants, where a pale shape lay half-curled and still as stone. He stepped out slowly, as if any sound might shatter the moment, and the heat struck him full in the chest. But he didn't feel it. Not really. All he could see was the frail rise and fall of ribs, the soft twitch of an ear, the way the herd had formed a silent wall around her guardians of something they didn't understand but honored. Anyway, he called her name once, softly, afraid to break the spell, and she did not move. Not at first. But her ear turned. Then her head lifted slow, aching, deliberate. She sniffed the air, her nose quivering in the heat, and he saw it. Then the flicker in her posture, the uncertainty laced with something deeper, older memory, not clear, but felt her body, tensed. A tremble ran through her legs as she tried to rise and failed. Her breath came ragged, but her face tilted toward him, and he stepped closer, knees sinking into hot dust. He knelt in front of her, lowered his head and waited. He said nothing. He didn't need to. The silence stretched between them, full and fragile, and then she moved just slightly, inch by inch, dragging herself forward until her muzzle brushed against his forehead. Not a mistake, not an accident, but with purpose, the way she used to, when she was young, when words had never mattered between them. And in that touch, something broke wide open inside him. Joy and grief and disbelief roaring through his bones as her body settled against him, trembling with exhaustion and peace. She remembered not through sight, not through logic, but through something deeper than either a bond written in the way they breathed together, in the echo of footsteps, walked side by side in another life. And for the first time in a decade, Daniel let himself cry not for what was lost, but for what had somehow been found again. And around them, the elephants stood unmoving, as if holding the moment still, as if they too understood that something holy had just returned to the earth. The first days were quiet, slow, filled with soft sounds and patient rhythms. Daniel sat beside her under wide open skies, reading aloud from books she couldn't see, telling stories with only his voice, his tone, his breath. She ate in small bites, her body learning safety. Again. Her ears twitched at every sound, but slowly tension drained from her shoulders, and one morning as he hummed a tune, he hadn't realized he remembered. She leaned into his side, not in weakness, but in choice. The pressure, light, steady, familiar. And he smiled, not with his mouth, but with his whole being. Days passed, and she began to move with more confidence, not because she could see, but because she no longer needed to doubt his presence. Her steps fell into the old cadence, the one that once matched his own, and when he walked, she followed not too close, but close enough one afternoon. She lifted her head at the sound of his laugh and gave a short, rough exhale, almost a huff, almost a reply, and it felt like sunlight breaking through, old stone. A few weeks later, she pawed at the hem of his shirt like she used to when she wanted to play, and his breath caught because it wasn't instinct. It was memory. The bond had not faded. It had endured. She trusted again, and with every small gesture, every press of her body against his every silent moment shared between them, something inside Daniel began to breathe again. The weight he had carried all those years without knowing it began to ease. He no longer waited for the past to return, because it already had, just not as it was, but as it needed to be changed, softened stronger through the scar. Not despite it, and in the evenings, as the wind stirred the tall grass and the light turned gold, they would sit together, not needing anything more than presence and breath and the quiet knowing that they were no longer alone. And in that stillness, Daniel finally understood healing was not a grand arrival, but a gentle returning, and love, true love, does not demand to be seen, only remembered. Some connections do not ask for explanation. They do not vanish with time or break beneath silence. They wait quietly beneath the surface of everything, patient as shadow, steady as breath. And when the world finally slows, when the moment is right, they return not to be loud, but to be true in Daniel's arms. Maisha found again the shape of trust, and in her presence, he remembered the part of himself he thought had died. They were not who they once were, but something deeper forged through loss, through waiting through the ache of absence, and still they chose each other because real bonds do not disappear. They only sleep until they are needed, and when they wake, they do not ask for words, only closeness, and in that closeness, everything broken begins to mend.